Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. Yeah, it should be good morning for everybody. I'm Erin Cordes with the University of Minnesota, and it's my pleasure to introduce the University of Minnesota project. The team coalesced around the following question. Despite known soil health improvements, decreased risk of nutrient loss, and some cost share opportunities, why is there continually low cover crop use in Southeast Minnesota? And so they've taken a systems thinking approach to try and address this question. The team members are Brigitte Lazinski, Manny Sabat, Abby Schuft, and Noel Soriano. With that, next slide, and I'll let the team take over.
Yeah. Can everybody hear me? Okay. So why is N a focus? N is the most essential macronutrient needed for proper growth and biomass production. Nitrogen deficiencies result in stunted plant growth and reduced yields in crops such as corn. Due to its high application rate, nitrogen adds greatly to the operating costs for producers or farmers. Although nitrogen is available in soils, it's predominantly found in as organic nitrogen, which is the plant unavailable form, while plant available nitrogen, ammonium and nitrate, is exceedingly rare in soils. Therefore, producers have to rely on external inputs of plant available nitrogen to meet row crop demand. These forms include manure as well as synthetic inputs. However, manure is oftentimes applied in the fall because the soil conditions are better for equipment traffic due to it being more solid and sometimes frozen in the fall. While spring application is more strategic in terms of nutrient loss mitigation and improving nitrogen use efficiency. However, in the recent past, there have been episodes of prolonged wet springs that do not allow for equipment traffic, as the soils won't support the equipment traffic, as the manure spreaders can carry loads of manure that are a few thousand gallons in volume. So producers oftentimes elect to apply manure in the fall, right after row crop harvest, after corn or soybean. However, an alternative strategy for fall application is to plant a cover crop. Cover crops have been shown to have a significant effect on soil nitrogen by being able to take up any residual mineral nitrogen instead of it being lost to water bodies, which can harm human and environmental health. Although in the upper Midwest, cover crop adoption is low due to the short cover crop growing season, especially for fall applied manure, not to mention the prolonged cold winters, which inhibits crop growth. When producers do plant cover crops, it is common to plant cover crops after manure application. But recent studies have shown that cover crops can be planted prior to manure application, which can expand the cover crop growing season. Next slide. So what are cover crops? Cover crops are plants planted in between the sowing and harvest of main row crops such as corn and soybean. Cover crops are gaining momentum in terms of usage by producers due to their widely established benefits, but this is not entirely the case in southwestern Minnesota. Sorry. Especially when manure is fall applied, as previously mentioned. They can control soil erosion by stabilizing soil aggregates and nutrient loss through nutrient uptake. They also can suppress weeds through competition for sunlight, moisture, and space, as well as through allelopathic interactions. Cover crops have also shown to increase soil organic matter, but this varies between geographic areas. Depending on the species types, they can either fix or scavenge for nitrogen, and in turn has a direct effect on the nitrogen cycle. Through their inputs of organic exudates and benefits to soil biological, physical, and chemical components, cover crops have been shown to improve soil health. The USDA defines soil health as the continued capacity of soil to function as a vital living ecosystem that sustains plants, animals, and humans. Next slide. However, in order to harness the full benefits of cover crops, you need to have high enough biomass accumulation. This in turn is dependent on species selection, which is dependent on climate, as well as seed availability and cost. There are three types of commonly used cover crops: grasses such as rye, as you can see on the left. Due to their ability to accumulate high biomass and their winter hardiness, they are efficient at controlling soil erosion as well as nutrient loss, as they are efficient nutrient scavengers. Rye has been widely known to suppress weeds through their allelopathic interactions with wheat species. Legumes in the middle, which is a crimson clover, are nitrogen fixers, so they provide nitrogen to soils through biological nitrogen fixation with the help of symbiotic bacteria on their root nodules. Lastly, we have brassicas, such as radishes, which have gained increased attention recently. They, like grasses, are nutrient scavengers, but due to their extensive rooting systems that can go as deep as a few meters and have root diameters as much as 3 to 6 centimeters, they can scavenge for nutrients at even deeper soil depths and have shown to alleviate compaction, which improves water infiltration and water holding capacity.
Can you guys hear me okay? Okay. So with our initial research, we have come up with our dynamic hypothesis, which is year-to-year cover crop biomass is dependent on weather patterns. So weather strongly influences the growth of the cover crop, the timing for planting, and the amount of biomass grown. And then while long-term soil health benefits improve financial gain, there is a delay in this result. So kind of like what Manny was mentioning earlier, there are soil health benefits to using cover crops with such as improved physical and biological properties, supplying nutrients for plant growth, and reduce pesticide and herbicide costs. And so when you have increased soil health, you have increased crop growth productivity, and that results in improved financial gain. But because soil health doesn't change overnight or within a season, there is this delay. So these considerations, along with social and emotional factors, influence a farmer's adoption of cover crop use. So social factors we've kind of thought of as the number of peers around a farmer who are also practicing or using cover crops on their farms. And then emotional factors is how willing they are to try something new, or how cautious they are to try something new. And then continued adoption is influenced by two factors: short-term financial success and peer influence, as shown by the number of people adopting the practice over time.
So to orient you to the scope of the model and to introduce some of our assumptions that we worked on, to give you some context, here's obviously the state of Minnesota. Southeast Minnesota, we chose to use Dodge County and Fillmore County, which are highlighted in the maroon. And for those out-of-staters, the block M in the middle is the Twin Cities, where our campus and where we are based. And then the other four maroon stars are our other campus locations of the University of Minnesota. So in Dodge and Fillmore County, we are looking at the adoption rates of cereal rye cover crops, or those grass type cover crops, in conjunction with the use of corn. And in those counties, 2018 yields averaged about 193 bushels per acre. And we're looking at adoption rates on a per acre basis. So like a percentage of one farmer's acreage that they are planting over a span of 5 years, but we're looking at each of those 5 years individually. We are going to assume that they are aerially planting the cover crop seeds around August of each crop year. That's literally taking a plane and dropping seeds from the air. And that the nitrogen source is negligible. It's either going to be from a commercial fertilizer product or from manure inputs. And that every bushel of corn grown is going to take about 50% of the nitrogen from the soil. We also want to introduce to you a factor that we made up for our purposes, and that is the progressiveness of that farmer. And we used it as one of our factors, which we will talk more about when we go into our models, that some farmers are more progressive by nature. And they're willing to try new things. They're willing to test science. They're willing to investigate how something might work differently or better for them on their farm, rather than some other farmers who are non-progressive. So I believe Manny will talk a little bit more about that scale that we chose to use for that model, or for that variable in our models. Next slide. So when looking at this bigger question of why is cover crop adoption low in the southeast part of the state, there were lots of different factors that were involved. And we basically started by charting those on multiple maps. We have lots of different models, but it came down to some of the endogenous factors that are the actual individual decision making that is happening. There's different factors. There's risk, production risk that goes into some of those decision making. What is cover crop adoption and usage in the area? What are their peers doing? What are their crop advisors suggesting? What is soil nitrogen balance? Do they need to improve soil health, which is also one of the factors listed here? What their desired row crop growth is, what is their desired yield. Really, another huge factor is money in the bank. We typically would joke about this, I would at least, that we got money in the bank. Because that's really ultimately a really huge deciding factor is it profitable for the producer to have the expenditure, and then what will they gain from it, whether it be increased yield or better soil health for future generations. Some of those exogenous factors that we can't necessarily control but are really part of this decision making is weather patterns. We can't control weather patterns, but as Noel mentioned earlier, weather is ultimately going to affect what's the precipitation rates. Is it excessively dry or is it excessively wet? Are there cold temperatures, which is affecting growing degree days? What are the market prices for the row crop that's ultimately being grown? What are peers doing in their farming neighborhood? Is there pressure there? What is their nitrogen application? Is it commercial? Is it in synthetic fertilizers? Is it the manure? Is the manure readily available? And then part of the money in the bank concept are cost share opportunities. There are organizations that can help cover the cost of planting that cover crop, but they might fluctuate from areas of the state and goals of the particular farmer. Next slide.
So hopefully you guys can hear me okay. For this model, what we did is we considered three physical aspects within the cover crop system, being the cover crop, the cash crop / row crop during the regular growing season, as we would call it, and then the soil nitrogen balance. So basically what we did here is this is a pretty simplified model in respect to the row crop, and is dependent, and we know that the row crop is dependent on partially on soil nitrogen availability, while also being influenced pretty heavily by the soil health. Another thing that kind of plays into it is weather, and that weather seems to have a very significant effect on that row crop as well from year to year. However, we just kind of decide to leave that variable out of this model for the time being. Further, we know that as the crop grows, it draws soil nitrogen up, which ultimately will decrease the levels at the end of the game in the soil. We also know that the cover crop is dependent on the presence of soil nitrogen levels. And when the cover crop is terminated or has completed its growing season, and removed, the nitrogen in the biomass is then returned to the soil. So one of the benefits there is that the soil, from an environmental standpoint, is that the soil will recover because the cover crop is pulling the soil nitrogen up outside of the normal growing season for our row crops, which then is limiting our the amount of soil nitrogen available for water losses. However, we know that that is returned later by additional soil nitrogen into the soil, so that we have additional soil nitrogen available during our regular row crop growing season. So yeah, next slide.
So one of the, obviously our focusing question was about what's affecting cover crop adoption. So we also included, which became a really major function of our model, is our adopter model. And I thought, where did we, oh, Manny, I'll talk about progressiveness a little bit later. So in the upper right corner, you can see we have some of those factors of progressiveness of the individual, how many peers are practicing using cover crops, and what the cost share opportunities are. And so those are still factors that are affecting cover crop adoption, but are obviously not loops and cause and effect type concepts that we wanted to really focus on, because we really wanted to talk about money in the bank, what's it going to cost them, and then how is it improving their soil health. So those are the loops that we are showing here. We also showed that there is a delay in soil health. So with the cover crop biomass, we are also assuming that we are going to terminate the crop and till it under. So then all of that vegetation is what's contributing to soil health, whether it's less compaction, it's the soil nutrients. There's a delay there. They won't necessarily see huge returns after one cover crop year. The other scenario that we want to take into play is pulling in that cost share opportunity. What if there's small cost share opportunities that will likely affect cover crop adoption rates? If there's high cost share opportunities, like 75 or 100% of that cost, then that's really going to help encourage, because then that's going to be affecting money in the bank and what those production costs will be, and what cost the producer will have to incur. There we go. Next.
From what Abby had mentioned earlier, we know that money in the bank is a very important factor in whether a farmer chooses to adopt cover crops into their farms, where a farmer is more likely to plant cover crops when they have more money in the bank. So for our money in the bank model, the amount of money a farmer has is dependent on this balance between their income and payments. So for income in our model, we have the price received by the farmer from their row crop, the cost share funds, and then for payments, we have the cost of cover crop seed, the row crop seed, the fertilizer, and production cost. And then we've also identified a balancing loop in this model where if you have more money in the bank, you have increased cover crop adoption by an individual, so a higher percent of acreage. And then with higher cover crop adoption, you have more cover crop production costs, which then increases your payments and reduces money in the bank, so to make a balancing loop. So with all those different models, we have integrated them into our full model. And there are three main relationships that we'd like to highlight. One is that precipitation influences water-based losses of nitrogen in soil. So over here is our precipitation variable. And this affects water-based losses and results in losses from the soil. And this affects cover crop growth over here. and also the yield. Another relationship we have is soil health benefits improve financial gain, but there is a delay. So here we have the cover crop biomass connected to soil health, and there is this delay marker. Soil health influences cover crop and row crop growth and row crop yield, which then influences the income and money in the bank. And then the third relationship we wanted to show was social and emotional factors influencing farmer adoption. So social factors here are indicated by the number of peers practicing cover crop usage. And then the emotional factor is noted by the progressiveness, which we have defined as, Manny will talk about this later, as an inherent characteristic of the farmer. And the main idea for this full model is that we wanted to show the interrelationships between all these smaller models that we talked about earlier. We kind of pieced them apart to show the loops a little bit better, but overall this is kind of how they come together. Yeah.
So yeah, so we kind of focus on our model on a few major variables that we thought were important in this situation. First, as we have mentioned before, is the progressiveness, which is an inherent quality. This is hard to really apply a number, so we kind of elected to use a sliding scale. So 1 basically indicates that a farmer is not really progressive. They're far less likely to try cover cropping, unlike someone who is a 10, who is very progressive and is very willing to give it a try because they believe in the science, they believe in the experimentation of all this and see how they can improve their row crop system. And just like a lot of people in society, farmers tend to do things if they see a lot of their other peers doing it. So if farmer sees that all their neighbors are planting a cover crop, then they are more likely to consider this. Bulk adoption will dictate how easy it will be to take up cover cropping by an individual. But the thing is, huge drawback from cover crops, as we mentioned before, is the cost associated with planting and terminating a cover crop. Extension offices have indicated that it can cost as much as $60 per acre to plant a rye, from planting with a fossil fuel intake and also just terminating the cover crops with a herbicide or tilling it under, or however you want to kill it. And so one thing is the rye seeds can cost as much as 30 cents per pound, and sometimes there's a it's kind of variable how much seeding rates you'll do. From some people say 20 to 50, I've seen people do 70. So it all depends on your climate and how much cover crop you want in your system. And so since cover crops aren't free, farmers can be hesitant to apply cover crops. So cost share opportunities to offset the money it takes to plant a cover crop can greatly incentivize them to plant cover crops. And the big thing is also weather. Weather is a huge factor for both cover crop and row crops. If a plant does not have enough heat or growing degree days, it won't be able to germinate and grow well, as well as moisture. If it is too dry or too wet, crops won't be able to properly grow. So everything has to be just right for proper growth and maturity of each cover crop or row crop.
So a couple scenarios that we kind of looked at or worked through with our problem was how different weather patterns may impact, as well as links between water losses and decision making, for example, and in relation to cost share. So for example, the cost share might be higher if there are more water losses, and then some additional economic benefits that we can gain from cover cropping, such as the availability to graze livestock or produce a niche product for market through cover cropping. Next slide.
So if we were to take scenario 3 and add that to our adopter model, taking the cover crop biomass that is available, and rather than terminating it and tilling it under, using it, as Brigitte mentioned, to graze animals or to even harvest it as a forage product, you've now added another economically viable option that will affect ultimately your money in the bank, specifically if you are running livestock with your agronomic operation as well. So this can also help connect our adopter model to our physical model of soil health and our nitrogen balance. And it can also affect decision making ultimately as the loops start to circle back around and influence cover crop adoption.
So as we mentioned before, we know that these models are not 100% final and complete. And so we felt that for our next steps to improve our model, they've kind of fell into two categories, being the refining of our variables as well as adding additional variables. And so in regard to refining variables, we think that there was some improvements we can make in respect to soil health, cover crop adoption, and cost share opportunities. And then those are just some things that we're a little confused on and need to gather some more data on, as that can be pretty variable from farmer to farmer, area to area. And then additionally adding variables to our model, looking into risk variables, volatilization, and then management and labor costs, which are also some things that just getting some more access to information would move our model to another level, we felt. And so, again, just some things that aren't very published in respect to data, but more so dependent on farmer to farmer information and data.
So in conclusion, the use of cover crops from this investigation, we found that the use of cover crops provide soil health benefits, but there is a delay in seeing these soil health benefits. We also see financial gain in the long term. However, there is an initial investment that is needed. But one of the main things that we've tried to do with our model was to connect physical, economic, and human elements to the model, where the physical element is the soil system, the economic is the money in the bank, and the human elements are the decision making. And so one question that we are thinking of is how can we use this model as a tool to help increase cover crop adoption in Minnesota. So from when we ran our model, we saw that we can see how various factors change over time, including financial gain and soil health, which are benefits that the farmers want to see when adopting cover crops. And when we ran our model, we saw that financial gain didn't really increase within the first year of implementation, and that knowing that is really helpful for the farmer when it comes to decision making, because they would know how much money they would need to start to implement cover crops and still keep their farm afloat during that first year or that first 3 seasons or something like that. And then on the policy side, this could be also useful to see how much money these agencies can give to farmers if they know that farmers are less likely to adopt cover crops because they know that farmers won't experience much financial gain in that first year. And then also from our model, we saw increased soil health over time, but there was a delay. So this is also important when it comes to decision making for the farmer, because they might prioritize other things versus wanting to improve or waiting to improve their soil health over 5 years. And then with other additions and refinements of other variables to our model, farmers can use this framework to see like worst case scenarios, such as whether the weather patterns for one season is terrible, and if they can still like make it profitable within 5 years or within a year, and make decisions that way. And so overall, this model can be used to help in decision making because it provides a framework that merges the physical, economic, and human elements related to this problem. And knowing these factors can help us further identify what variables we would need to change to drive cover crop adoption in Southeast Minnesota.